They said testifying would destroy the family. I said maybe it needed to be destroyed. The text message came at 2:47 a.m. on a Tuesday, and it changed everything. Aunt Sarah, I need to tell you something, but I'm scared. Can we talk tomorrow after school? Please don't tell anyone I texted you. I stared at my phone screen, Emma's words glowing in the darkness of my bedroom. My 15-year-old cousin had never reached out to me like this before. We were close enough at family gatherings, but she was quiet, reserved, the kind of kid who smiled politely and helped clear dishes while the adults talked too loudly about politics and sports. I texted back immediately. Of course, sweetheart. Whatever you need. I'll pick you up from school at 3:30. We can get coffee and talk. Sleep didn't come after that. I kept thinking about the last family barbecue at my parents' house 3 weeks ago. Emma had been even quieter than usual, barely touching her burger, staying glued to my Aunt Linda's side. When Uncle Rick, Linda's husband of 18 years, tried to ruffle her hair like he'd done since she was little, I remembered how she'd flinched away from his touch. At the time, I chalked it up to typical teenage awkwardness. Now, a cold dread was settling in my stomach. The next day crawled by. I work as a graphic designer for a small marketing firm, and I probably refreshed my email 100 times without reading a single message. My coworker Jake asked if I was feeling okay around lunch. Apparently I'd been staring at the same logo design for 2 hours without making any changes. At 3:25, I was parked outside Lincoln High School, watching teenagers pour out of the brick building like water from a broken dam. Emma emerged near the back of the crowd, her dark hair hanging like a curtain around her face, backpack slung over one shoulder. She looked so small. She slid into my passenger seat without her usual greeting, just clicked her seatbelt and stared straight ahead. Starbucks okay? I asked gently. She nodded. I'd known Emma since the day she was born. Linda and I were only 4 years apart, more like sisters than aunt and niece, and I'd babysat Emma countless times when she was little. I'd taught her to braid friendship bracelets, helped her practice spelling words, listened to her excited chatter about books and movies and the boy in her math class who'd shared his cookies with her. This wasn't that same little girl sitting next to me. This Emma was wound tight as a spring, her fingers picking at a loose thread on her jeans, her leg bouncing with nervous energy. We found a corner table at the Starbucks on 5th Street. I ordered her usual, caramel macchiato with extra whip, hoping normalcy might help her relax. My own coffee sat untouched as I waited for her to find her words. You're going to hate our family after I tell you this, she finally whispered, not meeting my eyes. Emma, look at me. I reached across the table and gently touched her hand. There is nothing, absolutely nothing, you could tell me that would make me hate you. Or think less of you. Or love you any less. Do you understand me? She looked up then, and I saw tears threatening to spill over. But it's going to ruin everything. Mom said families are supposed to stick together no matter what, and if I tell someone, it's going to destroy us. My heart stopped. Sweetheart, who told you that you would destroy the family? The tears finally spilled over, streaming down Emma's cheeks as she pulled her hand away from mine and wrapped her arms around herself. I can't, she whispered. I promised I wouldn't say anything. Uncle Rick said if I ever told anyone, it would be my fault when the family fell apart. He said you and Mom would stop talking, and Grandma would have a heart attack from the stress, and everyone would blame me. Uncle Rick. The cold dread in my stomach crystallized into something sharper, angrier. Rick Morrison, my aunt's husband, the man who brought Emma presents every Christmas, who taught her to ride a bike when she was 6, who everyone called a good one because he didn't drink like some of the other men in our family. Emma, honey, what has Uncle Rick been doing? I kept my voice level even though every instinct was screaming. She shook her head violently. I can't. I already said too much. He'll know I told you something. How will he know? Because he always knows. Her voice cracked. He said he can tell when I've been thinking about telling someone because I get that look on my face. He said even thinking about it makes me a liar and a betrayer. I wanted to reach across the table and hold her, but she was folded in on herself now, unreachable. Instead, I pulled napkins from the dispenser and slid them toward her. Emma, I need you to listen to me very carefully. Whatever Uncle Rick has been doing to you, it is not your fault. And protecting yourself is not betraying the family. Anyone who tells you otherwise is wrong. She looked up at me then, her brown eyes, so much like her mother's, wide with something that looked like hope mixed with terror. But what if he's right? What if telling ruins everything? Mom's been so happy lately because you and her have been getting along better, and Grandma keeps talking about how proud she is that all her kids are doing well. Uncle Rick said if anyone found out about what we do together, that you'd all think I was disgusting and Mom would be so ashamed she'd probably move away. Or what we do together. The words made me physically nauseous, but I forced myself to stay calm. Emma was watching my face carefully, looking for any sign of judgment or disgust. Has he hurt you, sweetheart? A long pause. Then the smallest nod. How long has this been going on? Since I was 12. The words came out so quietly I almost missed them. It started the summer Mom went back to work at the bank and he would pick me up from day camp. At first he said it was just games. Special games that uncles and nieces played sometimes. 3 years. He'd been abusing her for 3 goddamn years, and none of us had seen it. Or maybe we had seen it and explained it away, her increasing withdrawal, the way she'd started avoiding family gatherings, how she never wanted sleepovers anymore. Does your mom know? Emma's face crumpled. I tried to tell her last month. I didn't say what he was doing exactly, but I said Uncle Rick made me uncomfortable and I didn't want to be alone with him anymore. She said I was being dramatic and that Uncle Rick has been nothing but good to our family. She said he helped them with a down payment on the house and he's always been there for us, and I was being ungrateful. Linda knew something was wrong and chose to ignore it. I sat back in my chair, feeling like I'd been punched in the gut. Linda, my Linda, who used to sneak me extra cookies when we were kids, who'd held my hair back when I was sick with the flu in college, who'd been my maid of honor at my disaster of a wedding to Marcus 3 years ago, had essentially told her daughter to shut up and be grateful for her abuse. Emma, what exactly did you tell your mom? I need to know her exact words. Emma wiped her nose with a napkin, leaving mascara streaks on the white paper. I said that Uncle Rick sometimes touched me in ways that made me feel weird, and that he told me it had to be our secret. I said I didn't like it and could she please not leave me alone with him anymore. And what did she say? She got really mad. Like, angrier than I've ever seen her. She said I had an overactive imagination and that I was misinterpreting normal family affection. Then she said. Emma's voice dropped to barely a whisper. She said that Uncle Rick was the best thing that ever happened to our family, and if I kept making up stories about him, I'd ruin the best relationship she'd ever had. The best relationship she'd ever had. I wanted to scream. Linda had been married to Rick for 18 years, and sure, he seemed stable compared to her disaster of a first marriage to Emma's biological father. Tom had been a gambling addict who drained their savings and disappeared when Emma was 4. Rick had swooped in like a hero, steady job at the electric company, good credit, never raised his voice. He'd legally adopted Emma when she was 6. The same year he'd gotten unfettered access to a vulnerable little girl who'd already been abandoned by one father figure. What happened after you talked to your mom? Emma's hands were shaking now. She told Uncle Rick what I said. That night at dinner, he was super nice to me in front of Mom, kept saying how much he loved me, how I was the daughter he never had, how lucky he was to have such a special relationship with me. But after Mom went to bed, he came to my room. My coffee cup rattled against the saucer as I set it down too hard. What did he do? He sat on my bed and told me how disappointed he was that I tried to hurt Mom like that. He said he'd heard in her voice how worried she was that I might be having psychological problems, and that if I kept acting out, she might have to send me to a psychiatric hospital for evaluation. He said he tried to defend me, told her I was probably just confused, but if it happened again, even he wouldn't be able to protect me. The manipulation was breathtaking. He'd managed to turn Linda into his ally and make Emma believe her own mother saw her as mentally unstable. Classic predator behavior: isolate the victim, make them believe no one will believe them, convince them they're the problem. Then he said that since I was clearly confused about what was appropriate, he needed to show me again what real love looked like. And he. Emma's voice broke entirely. He hurt me worse than he ever had before. He said it was a punishment for lying, but also a reminder of how much he loved me. He kept asking if I understood now, if I was going to keep trying to hurt the family. I realized I was gripping the edge of the table hard enough that my knuckles had turned white. Around us, the Starbucks continued its normal rhythm, baristas calling out drink orders, students typing on laptops, the espresso machine hissing steam. Normal life, while my 15-year-old cousin described 3 years of systematic abuse. Emma, I believe you. Everything you're telling me, I believe. And we're going to stop this. She looked at me with such raw hope it almost broke my heart. But how? Mom won't listen, and Uncle Rick said if I ever told anyone else, he'd make sure everyone knew I was a liar who destroys families. I leaned forward, meeting her eyes directly. Sweetheart, there are people whose job it is to protect kids like you. People who won't care about family reputation or keeping secrets. The hope in her eyes flickered with terror. You mean like, police? I mean exactly like police. No, Emma whispered, pulling back so fast she nearly knocked over her drink. No, no, no. You can't call the police. You promised you wouldn't tell anyone. Emma, I never promised that. I said I believed you, and I said we'd stop this. I can't do that by keeping quiet. But you don't understand. She was crying again, harder now, her voice rising enough that a woman at the next table glanced over with concern. Uncle Rick's cousin is a police officer. Officer Danny Morrison? He comes to all our family barbecues. He and Uncle Rick go fishing together every weekend. What if they send Danny to investigate? He'll just tell Uncle Rick everything I said. My stomach dropped. Danny Morrison. I knew exactly who she meant, Rick's younger cousin, the one who always wore his uniform to family gatherings like he was still on duty, who loved to tell stories about catching drunk drivers and breaking up domestic disputes. The one who pulled me over for speeding 2 years ago and let me off with a warning because family looks out for family. Okay, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. Okay, we'll make sure Danny isn't involved. There are other detectives, other departments we can call. You're not listening. Emma's voice cracked with desperation. It doesn't matter who you call. Uncle Rick has friends everywhere. He's lived here his whole life. He coaches Little League, he volunteers at the church pancake breakfasts, everyone thinks he's this amazing guy. Last year when the Hendersons' house flooded, he organized the whole neighborhood to help them rebuild. Who's going to believe me over him? She wasn't wrong. Rick Morrison was woven into the fabric of our small town like a golden thread. 23 years at the electric company, never missed a day. Deacon at First Presbyterian. His name was on the sponsor board at the high school football field. He'd been volunteer of the year at the fire department's annual dinner just 6 months ago. Plus, Emma continued, wiping her nose with another napkin, you know what Grandma always says about airing dirty laundry. Remember what happened when Cousin Jennifer got divorced? How Grandma didn't speak to her for 2 years because she said Jennifer should have worked it out privately instead of embarrassing the family in court. I remembered. Jennifer had filed for divorce from her abusive ex-husband, Mark, after he'd put her in the hospital with 3 broken ribs. Instead of support, she'd gotten lectures from Grandma about the sanctity of marriage and how women these days give up too easily. It had taken Jennifer moving to Oregon and essentially cutting contact with everyone for the family to finally admit that maybe Mark had been the problem. Emma, this is completely different. You're a child, and he's hurting you. That's not dirty laundry, that's a crime. Is it, though? She looked at me with eyes too old for her 15-year-old face. Because Uncle Rick said that what we do is just physical affection, and that lots of families are more open with physical affection than others. He said if I tried to tell people it was something bad, they'd think I was the one with a sick mind for interpreting it wrong. The sophistication of his manipulation was staggering. He'd spent 3 years convincing this kid that sexual abuse was just physical affection and that any discomfort she felt was her own moral failing. He also said that even if someone did believe me, the investigation would be horrible for everyone. That they'd interview you and Mom and Grandma and make you all choose sides. He said the questions they ask are really gross and personal, and that they'd probably take me away from Mom and put me in foster care with strangers while they figured out what to do. My phone buzzed against the table. A text from my mother, family dinner Sunday at 6. Linda's making her famous lasagna. Rick's grilling. Can you bring dessert? I stared at the message, feeling sick. In 3 days, I was supposed to sit at the same table as Rick Morrison, make small talk, probably compliment him on his perfectly grilled corn. Emma would be there too, probably helping serve drinks and clearing plates while her abuser played the role of loving stepfather. What if we talked to someone else first? I asked, setting my phone face down. Like a counselor, or a teacher you trust? Someone who could help us figure out the best way to handle this. Emma shook her head. Mrs. Patterson at school is married to Tom Patterson, who works with Uncle Rick. And the guidance counselor, Mr. Chen, his daughter is on Uncle Rick's Little League team. Everyone's connected to everyone here, Aunt Sarah. You know that. She was right. Millbrook had only 12,000 people, and the families like ours, the ones whose grandparents had built the original downtown, whose names were on the war memorial in the town square, we were all tangled together like Christmas lights that had been stored badly. You couldn't pull one string without affecting a dozen others. There has to be someone, I said. Someone outside of town, someone who doesn't know our family. Emma looked at me with a mixture of hope and terror. You really think it's worth destroying everything? The question hung in the air between us like smoke. Was it worth destroying everything? I looked at Emma, really looked at her. The dark circles under her eyes that I'd attributed to typical teenage late nights. The way she'd started wearing oversized hoodies even in summer. How she'd stopped laughing at my terrible dad jokes at family gatherings. 3 years of signs I'd missed because I'd been so focused on maintaining the comfortable fiction that we were a normal, happy family. Emma, what if I told you that keeping this secret is what's actually destroying things? That it's destroying you? She picked at the cardboard sleeve on her cup. But I'm just one person. If this comes out, it ruins everything for everyone. Mom will have to get divorced again, and she's already been through that once. Grandma and Grandpa Morrison will lose their son. All the kids Uncle Rick coaches will lose their coach right before playoffs. The church will lose their deacon. The church will lose their deacon, I repeated slowly. Emma, do you hear yourself? You're worried about the church softball schedule while a grown man is sexually abusing you. Her face flushed red. It's not just about softball. It's about everything falls apart. And what if nobody believes me anyway? What if they all think I'm lying or crazy, and then I've destroyed everything for nothing? My phone buzzed again. This time it was a text from Linda herself. Can you pick up Emma from her orthodontist appointment on Friday? Rick's got that work thing in Riverside, and I can't leave the bank. She gets out at 4:30. You're such a lifesaver. Red heart. I showed Emma the screen. Your mom wants me to pick you up Friday because Rick has to go to Riverside for work. Emma's face went completely white. No. I can take the bus home. Why? What happens when you're alone with him in the car? She looked around the coffee shop frantically, like she was planning an escape route. I can't. We can't talk about this anymore. I shouldn't have texted you. This was a mistake. She started to get up, but I reached across and gently caught her wrist. Emma, wait. You texted me at 2:47 in the morning because you needed help. You've been carrying this alone for 3 years, and it's eating you alive. Don't walk away now. But what if you're wrong, she whispered, sinking back into her chair. What if telling someone makes everything worse? What if they don't believe me, or they do believe me but they can't prove it, and then Uncle Rick gets angry and... She shuddered. He told me what happens to girls who lie about their families. He showed me news articles about kids who got taken away from their parents and put in group homes where terrible things happened to them. The systematic psychological torture was breathtaking. He'd isolated her from every potential source of help, convinced her that speaking up would only lead to worse abuse. Can I ask you something? I said. Do you think this is going to stop? Do you think Rick is going to wake up one day and decide he's done hurting you? Emma stared at her hands. He said when I turn 18 and go to college, things will be different. He said it's just until then. That's 3 more years, Emma. 3 more years of this. I know. Her voice was barely audible. I had a calendar in my room where I cross off days until graduation. 743 days left. 743 days. She had been counting down her childhood in units of survival. And what about after you leave? Does Rick have access to other kids? Emma's head snapped up. What do you mean? I mean he coaches Little League. He volunteers with children at church. If he's doing this to you, what makes you think you're the only one? The color drained from her face completely. No. No, he wouldn't. I'm special. He always tells me I'm special, that our relationship is unique. Emma, predators always tell their victims they're special. That's how they maintain control. She was shaking now, her coffee completely forgotten. You think there are others? I think we need to find out. The next morning, I called in sick to work and drove to the Millbrook Public Library. If Rick Morrison had other victims, there might be traces, patterns that no one had bothered to look for because he was such an upstanding citizen. I started with the local newspaper archives, searching online for any mention of his name over the past 5 years. Most of it was exactly what I'd expected. Rick Morrison leads church fundraiser, Morrison Electric donates to youth baseball program, local volunteer coordinates flood relief efforts. Page after page of glowing coverage that painted him as the town's golden boy. But then I found something that made my stomach clench. A small article from 18 months ago, Millbrook Little League season ends early due to coaching staff changes. The piece was frustratingly vague, something about scheduling conflicts and personal matters that had forced the league to shuffle coaches mid-season. Rick's team, the Millbrook Eagles, had been dissolved entirely, with players redistributed to other teams. I drove to the league office, a cramped space above Patterson's hardware store. The woman behind the desk, Mrs. Kowalski, had been running youth sports in this town since I was Emma's age. Oh, you're one of Linda's people, she said when I introduced myself. How's that sweet girl of hers doing? Emma, right? She's doing okay. I'm actually here about something else. I'm working on a scrapbook project for Rick's birthday, you know how he loves his coaching, and I was hoping to get some information about his teams over the years. Mrs. Kowalski's expression shifted almost imperceptibly. Which years specifically? Well, all of them, really. But I noticed the Eagles team was dissolved in 2022. I wanted to make sure I got the story right. She was quiet for a long moment, rifling through file folders with more attention than seemed necessary. That was a complicated situation. Oh? What happened? Well, there were some concerns raised by parents. Nothing formal, you understand, just concerns. My heart started racing. What kind of concerns? Mrs. Kowalski glanced toward the door, then lowered her voice. Look, I probably shouldn't be talking about this. Rick's a good man who's done a lot for this community. But there were questions about his methodology with some of the younger players. Methodology? Private coaching sessions. One-on-one training after regular practice. Some parents felt it was unnecessary, maybe inappropriate. There was one incident where a parent came to pick up their daughter early and found Rick in the equipment shed with her, going over batting stance. She made air quotes. The door was locked from the inside. I gripped the edge of her desk. What happened to that parent? Did they file a complaint? The Hendersons? Oh, honey, no. Rick had organized that whole flood relief effort for them just 6 months earlier. Basically saved their house. They weren't about to bite the hand that fed them, if you know what I mean. She shook her head. They just quietly moved their daughter to a different team. The Hendersons. I knew them. Their daughter Macy was 13 now, about the same age Emma had been when Rick's abuse started. Are there other parents I could talk to? For the scrapbook? Mrs. Kowalski's eyes narrowed slightly. You know, dear, if this is really for Rick's birthday, maybe you should be asking him directly about his favorite coaching memories. I'd pushed too far. Of course, you're right. I wanted it to be a surprise, but I should probably just ask the families directly. When I got back to my car, I sat in the library parking lot with shaking hands, making a list of what I knew. Rick had been forced out of coaching under mysterious circumstances. At least one parent had caught him alone with a child in a locked room. The Henderson family had been financially indebted to him when the incident occurred. Mrs. Kowalski clearly knew more than she was willing to say. My phone rang. Linda. Sarah, thank God you answered. Emma didn't come home from school today, and she's not answering her phone. Her friend Madison said she left right after 6th period but never made it to her part-time job at the ice cream shop. Rick's out looking for her now, but I'm worried sick. Emma was missing. She'd run away, and Rick Morrison, her abuser, was out there looking for her. Linda, where exactly is Rick searching? He's checking all her usual spots, the park, the mall, that bookstore she likes downtown. He knows her better than anyone, you know? He's so good with her, always has been. He's probably the only one who'll be able to find her. Rick knew Emma was talking to someone. Somehow, he'd figured out that she was ready to break her silence, and now she was running scared. Linda, I'm going to help look too. I'll check the... Actually, Rick said it's better if just he looks for now. You know how Emma gets when she's overwhelmed, too many people fussing over her makes her shut down even more. He thinks if she sees him alone, she'll be more likely to come home voluntarily. My blood ran cold. Rick had convinced Linda to keep everyone else away while he hunted down a terrified 15-year-old who was finally ready to expose him. I'll call you as soon as we find her, Linda continued. Rick's got such a good feeling about this. He said he knows exactly where she'd go when she's upset. The line went dead. I stared at my phone, Emma's desperate text from 2 days ago still saved in our message thread. Please don't tell anyone I texted you. Now she was out there somewhere, alone and terrified, while her abuser systematically searched every place she might feel safe. I had to find her first. I drove to every place I could think of, my hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles ached. The bookstore downtown, closed, no sign of Emma. The park where she used to feed ducks when she was little, empty except for a jogger with his dog. The 24-hour diner on Route 9 where teenagers sometimes hung out, nothing. My phone buzzed with updates from Linda every 20 minutes. Rick checked the movie theater. He talked to her friend Kayla's mom. He's so worried, Sarah. He loves that girl like his own daughter. Each text made me more frantic. Rick wasn't just looking for Emma, he was systematically eliminating her hiding places, cutting off her options. And he had advantages I didn't, 18 years of living with her, knowing her habits, her fears, the places she felt safe. At 7:15 p.m., I was sitting in my car outside the Millbrook Community Center, trying to think like a scared 15-year-old, when my phone rang. Unknown number. Aunt Sarah? Emma's voice was barely a whisper. Emma. Jesus, where are you? Are you okay? I can't tell you where I am. But I saw Uncle Rick's truck drive by twice in the last hour. He's looking for me, isn't he? Yes, sweetheart, he is. Your mom's worried sick. She thinks you just ran off because you were upset about something. I heard them talking this morning before school. Her voice was shaking. Uncle Rick told Mom that he was concerned about my behavior lately, that I seemed to be acting out and maybe they should consider family counseling. He said sometimes teenage girls make up stories for attention, especially when they feel like they're not getting enough love at home. The bastard was already laying groundwork, preparing Linda for the possibility that Emma might accuse him of something. Classic predator move, discredit the victim before they even speak. Emma, where are you calling from? There's this old lady, Mrs. Chen, who lives near the school. I was sitting on the bench at the bus stop because I didn't know where else to go, and she saw me crying. She let me use her phone. Emma's voice dropped even lower. Aunt Sarah, I can't go home. Not tonight. Not with him looking for me like this. He's going to know I talked to you about what he does. Okay, listen to me. Can you stay with Mrs. Chen tonight? Is she willing to let you? She already offered, but I'm scared. What if Uncle Rick comes here? What if he tells Mom I'm staying with some stranger and she makes me come home? Before I could answer, I heard a vehicle approaching. Through Mrs. Chen's phone, I could hear the distinct rumble of Rick's diesel pickup truck. Emma, is that him? Oh God, yes. His truck just pulled into the driveway. He's getting out. Mrs. Chen is answering the door. There was muffled conversation I couldn't make out, then Emma came back on the line, whispering frantically. He's telling her he's my stepfather and I'm having emotional problems. He's showing her his ID. She's going to let him take me. Emma, listen to me very carefully. Do not get in that truck with him. I don't care what he says, don't get in the truck. But what choice do I have? Mrs. Chen thinks he's here to help me. She keeps saying what a relief it must be for him to find me safe. I could hear Rick's voice in the background now, smooth and concerned, playing the role of the worried parent. I know Emma can be dramatic sometimes. Teenage girls, you know how it is. Her mother and I have been so worried. I'm coming, I told Emma. What's the address? You can't. If you show up, he'll know for sure that I told you something. Then it'll be even worse. She was right. If I arrived at Mrs. Chen's house right now, Rick would immediately understand that Emma had confided in me. The confrontation would happen in front of a stranger, Emma would be trapped, and Rick would have time to craft his story. Emma, you still there? He's walking toward me now. He's smiling, but his eyes. Aunt Sarah, his eyes look really angry. Her voice was getting smaller, more distant. He's telling Mrs. Chen about how I've been having troubles at school, how the counselor recommended family therapy. Lies. All of it lies, but delivered with such smooth confidence that Mrs. Chen was probably thinking what a dedicated stepfather he was. I have to go, Emma whispered. He's reaching for the phone. The line went dead. I sat in my car for 30 seconds, heart pounding, then started driving toward Emma's neighborhood. I didn't have Mrs. Chen's exact address, but I knew the area near the school. Maybe I could intercept them, create some kind of distraction. My phone buzzed with a text from Linda. Rick found her. She was at some elderly neighbor's house. He's bringing her home now. What a relief. He said she seemed really confused and upset, but he got her calmed down. He's so good with her when she gets like this. When she gets like this, like what? Like terrified? Like finally ready to tell the truth about what he'd been doing to her? I pulled over at the intersection of Maple and 3rd, 2 blocks from Emma's house, and watched Rick's pickup truck drive slowly past. Through the passenger window, I caught a glimpse of Emma's profile. She was sitting rigidly upright, staring straight ahead, her hands folded in her lap. The truck disappeared around the corner, taking her back to the house where she would spend another night counting down the 743 days until college, until escape, until this nightmare might finally end. Unless I did something to end it first. The next morning, I called Emma's school and pretended to be Linda checking on her attendance. The secretary confirmed Emma was absent family emergency according to the note Rick had dropped off at 7:30 a.m. He was keeping her home. Isolated. Probably sick for the rest of the week. I drove past their house on Sycamore Street 3 times between 9 a.m. and noon. Linda's silver Honda was gone, she'd be at the bank until 5 p.m. Rick's truck sat in the driveway like a guard dog. The house looked normal, peaceful even, with its blue shutters and the flower boxes Linda had planted last spring. You'd never guess that inside, a 15-year-old girl was being held prisoner by her own stepfather. At 12:47 p.m., I made a decision that would change everything. I called the Department of Children and Family Services hotline. DCFS intake, this is Jennifer speaking. My mouth went dry. I need to report suspected child sexual abuse. Okay, I'm going to take down some information. Can you give me your name and relationship to the child? My name is Sarah Walsh. The child is my cousin, Emma Morrison. She's 15. And what is your relationship to the alleged perpetrator? He's my uncle by marriage. Rick Morrison. Saying his name out loud to a stranger felt like crossing a line I could never uncross. Can you tell me what disclosure the child has made? I told her everything. Emma's late-night text, our conversation at Starbucks, the 3 years of abuse, Linda's refusal to listen. My voice remained steady until I got to the part about Rick hunting Emma down the night before. The child is currently missing school, I continued. The perpetrator called her out sick this morning and is keeping her isolated at home. Ms. Walsh, I need to ask, have you encouraged the child to make a formal disclosure to us directly? I tried to, but she's terrified. He's convinced her that reporting will destroy the family and that no one will believe her anyway. There was typing on the other end. I'm showing the address as 847, Sycamore Street in Millbrook? Yes. And you said the alleged perpetrator is home with the child now? Yes. Her mother works at First National Bank downtown until 5 p.m. weekdays. More typing. Ms. Walsh, I need to inform you that we're required to investigate all reports within 24 hours. Given that the child is currently alone with the alleged perpetrator, we'll be dispatching investigators this afternoon. My heart hammered against my ribs. What does that mean exactly? 2 investigators will go to the home and interview the child privately. They'll also interview the alleged perpetrator and the mother. If there's immediate danger, they have authority to remove the child from the home temporarily. What if he's coached her? What if she denies everything? Ms. Walsh, our investigators are trained to recognize signs of abuse even when children are afraid to disclose. But I have to tell you, making this report means there's no going back. Once we're involved, this becomes a formal investigation. No going back. After I hung up, I sat in my car outside the post office, hands shaking, replaying those words. At 2:15 p.m., everything was still normal. Rick was still just my uncle-in-law who brought good wine to family dinners. Emma was still just my quiet cousin who helped clear dishes. At 2:16 p.m., I became the person who destroyed our family. My phone rang at 4:33 p.m. Linda, sobbing so hard I could barely understand her. Sarah, something terrible is happening. These people from Child Services showed up at my house. They're interviewing Emma right now, asking her horrible questions about Rick. They won't tell me what this is about, just that someone made allegations. I pulled over, gripping the phone. What did Rick say? He's devastated. He keeps asking what he could have possibly done to make someone think. God, Sarah, what if someone's trying to frame him? What if this is about that coaching thing from 2 years ago? Some parents never forgave him for the team restructuring. Linda, what if it's not about framing him? Silence. Then, what do you mean? What if someone reported this because it's true? Sarah Catherine Walsh. Her voice turned ice cold. Are you suggesting that Rick, the man who adopted my daughter, who's raised her since she was 6 years old, are you suggesting he would hurt her? I'm suggesting maybe you should listen to what Emma tells these investigators. Emma doesn't need to tell them anything because there's nothing to tell. Linda's voice cracked with hysteria. This is some vindictive person trying to destroy a good man's reputation. Rick is talking to his lawyer right now. His lawyer. Of course he had a lawyer on speed dial. Linda dash. I have to go. The investigators want to talk to me now. But Sarah? When I find out who did this to our family, who made that call, I'll never forgive them. Never. The line went dead. Through my windshield, I watched normal people going about their normal lives, a mother pushing a stroller, teenagers skateboarding, Mr. Patterson sweeping the sidewalk in front of his hardware store. None of them knew that at 8:47, Sycamore Street, everything was falling apart. At 6:47 p.m., my doorbell rang. Through the peephole, I could see Linda standing on my front porch, her face blotchy from crying, still wearing her bank uniform with the name tag slightly crooked. Behind her, like a shadow, stood Rick. My blood turned to ice water. He'd come with her. I opened the door with the chain still latched. Linda, what's going on? How did the interviews go? Let us in, Sarah. Rick's voice was calm, controlled, but there was something underneath it that made my skin crawl. We need to talk. The investigators finished about an hour ago, Linda said, her voice hoarse. They asked Emma the most horrible, disgusting questions. Made her describe. God, I can't even repeat it. She was crying so hard she could barely breathe. I unlatched the chain with trembling fingers. They walked into my living room like they owned it, Linda collapsing onto my couch while Rick remained standing, hands clasped behind his back like he was inspecting the premises. They didn't find anything conclusive, Rick said, his eyes never leaving my face. Emma couldn't corroborate the allegations. Poor kid was so confused, so traumatized by their questions. Couldn't corroborate, that meant Emma had been too scared to tell them the truth. But here's the interesting thing, Rick continued, walking slowly around my coffee table. The investigators said the person who called in the report had very specific information. Details about Emma's schedule, about when I'd be home alone with her, about conversations that allegedly took place. Linda looked up at me with red-rimmed eyes. They said whoever called knew about Emma being out of school today. Only family would know Rick called her in sick this morning. My mouth went completely dry. What are you saying? We're saying, Rick's voice dropped lower, that whoever made this call has been talking to Emma privately. Filling her head with ideas. Maybe even coaching her on what to say. He was standing directly in front of me now, close enough that I could smell his cologne, the same cedar and sandalwood scent that had seemed normal at family gatherings but now made me nauseous. The investigators asked Emma if she'd talked to anyone recently about our family. Anyone who might have misinterpreted something innocent as something inappropriate. And? My voice came out as barely a whisper. She mentioned having coffee with you 2 days ago, Linda said. Said you asked a lot of questions about Rick, about whether she felt safe at home. Why would you ask her something like that, Sarah? The room felt like it was tilting. Rick was watching me with those pale blue eyes, waiting for my answer, probably already knowing exactly what it would be. I was just checking in on her. She seemed upset at the last family dinner. Upset about what? Rick asked. She was fine at dinner. Happy, even. Helped me grill the corn, sat next to me during dessert. Does that sound like a child who's afraid of her stepfather? He was rewriting history in real time, turning Emma's flinching compliance into affection, her terrified silence into contentment. You know what I think happened? Rick sat down on the arm of my sofa, too close to where I was standing. I think Emma said something completely innocent, maybe mentioned that she's getting older, needs more privacy, normal teenage stuff. And someone with a very active imagination twisted that into something sick. Rick's right, Linda said, grabbing onto this explanation like a life raft. Emma's been moody lately, talking about how she doesn't like being treated like a little kid anymore. Someone could easily misinterpret that. The question is, Rick said, his voice still unnaturally calm, who would be malicious enough to call child services based on a confused teenager's normal growing pains? They both stared at me. The weight of their suspicion pressed against my chest like a physical thing. I think, Rick continued, we need to have a family meeting tomorrow night. All of us together, me, Linda, Emma, your parents, Grandma and Grandpa Morrison. We need to discuss how to protect our family from these kinds of attacks. A family meeting. Where Emma would be surrounded by people who'd already decided she was confused, where Rick would control the narrative, where I'd be outnumbered and outmaneuvered. Emma's been through enough, I managed. Maybe we should just let things settle down. Rick smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. Oh no, Sarah. This is far from settled. The family meeting was set for Sunday at 6 p.m. at my parents' house on Elm Street, the same house where Linda and I had grown up, where we'd shared secrets and stolen cookies from the jar on top of the refrigerator. Now it felt like walking into enemy territory. I arrived 15 minutes early, hoping to talk to my parents alone before everyone else showed up. Mom was in the kitchen arranging store-bought cookies on her good china plate, a sure sign she was nervous. Sarah, honey, what's all this about? She didn't look up from the cookies. Rick called your father this morning, said there was some kind of misunderstanding with child services yesterday. Something about Emma? Dad appeared in the doorway, still wearing his weekend flannel shirt but with the serious expression he usually reserved for discussing property taxes or car repairs. Rick says someone made false accusations against him. Said it might be someone with a grudge, maybe related to that coaching situation a couple years back. What if they weren't false accusations? The cookie plate clattered against the counter. Mom finally looked at me, her face pale. Sarah, what are you saying? I'm saying maybe we should listen to what Emma has to say instead of assuming Rick's innocent. Rick Morrison? Dad's voice rose in disbelief. The man who organized the church food drive last Christmas? Who spent his own vacation time helping rebuild the Henderson's house? You think he's capable of hurting a child? I think predators are often people who seem trustworthy. That's how they get access to victims. Mom sank into one of the kitchen chairs like her legs wouldn't hold her anymore. Oh my God. Sarah, please tell me you didn't. Please tell me you weren't the one who called. Before I could answer, car door slammed in the driveway. Through the window, I watched Rick help Emma out of his pickup truck, his hand on her shoulder in what probably looked like paternal protection to anyone watching. But I could see the way Emma held herself, rigid, careful, like she was made of glass that might shatter if she moved wrong. Linda emerged from the passenger side, followed by Grandma and Grandpa Morrison from their ancient Buick. Rick had brought reinforcements. We'll discuss this later, Dad muttered as footsteps approached the front door. They filed into our living room like mourners at a funeral. Grandma Morrison immediately pulled Emma into a fierce hug, stroking her hair while shooting accusatory glances around the room. My poor baby, Grandma cooed. Having to answer those horrible questions from strangers. Don't you worry, sweetheart. We're going to figure out who did this to our family. Emma caught my eye over Grandma's shoulder. Her face was expressionless, but I could see the plea in her brown eyes. Help me. Rick positioned himself near the fireplace, commanding the room like he was giving a presentation. I want to thank everyone for coming. Yesterday was traumatic for all of us, but especially for Emma. She was interrogated by investigators for over 2 hours about private family matters. It was disgusting, Linda added, dabbing at her eyes with a tissue. They asked her about bath time, about whether Rick had ever seen her undressed, about whether anyone had ever touched her inappropriately. She's 15 years old. She shouldn't have to think about those kinds of things. She shouldn't have to experience those kinds of things, I thought but didn't say. The investigators told us, Rick continued, that whoever made the report had detailed knowledge of our family routines. They knew I'd kept Emma home from school yesterday. They knew Linda's work schedule. This wasn't some random accusation, this was personal. Grandpa Morrison cleared his throat. What are you suggesting, Rick? I'm suggesting that someone in this room made that call. The silence was deafening. I could hear the grandfather clock in the hallway ticking, the hum of the refrigerator, my own heartbeat thundering in my ears. Furthermore, Rick said, his voice steady and reasonable, I think we all know who it was. Every eye in the room turned toward me. Emma's face had gone completely white. Sarah had coffee with Emma on Wednesday. Emma mentioned it to the investigators when they asked about recent conversations. The report was made Thursday afternoon, less than 24 hours later. Rick's pale blue eyes locked onto mine. The timing is awfully coincidental. All eyes were on me, but I found myself looking at Emma. She was pressed so far back into the corner of the couch that she seemed to be trying to disappear into the cushions entirely. Her hands were clenched in her lap, knuckles white, and I could see a muscle in her jaw twitching with tension. Well? Rick's voice cut through the silence. Sarah, do you have something you'd like to share with the family? My mouth felt like sandpaper. This was it, the moment where I either threw Emma under the bus to save myself, or I stood up and accepted whatever came next. Yes, I said, my voice surprisingly steady. I made the call. The room erupted. Linda let out a strangled cry, Mom gasped so hard she started coughing, and Grandpa Morrison's face turned an alarming shade of red. How could you? Linda's voice cracked as she shot to her feet. How could you do this to us? To Emma? To Rick? I did it for Emma. You nearly destroyed an innocent man's reputation. Grandma Morrison's usually soft voice was shrill with outrage. Rick has been nothing but good to this family. He adopted that girl when her real father abandoned her, he's provided for her, loved her. He's been sexually abusing her for 3 years, I said quietly. The words hung in the air like a bomb that hadn't quite detonated yet. Emma made a small, strangled sound and buried her face in her hands. Rick's expression didn't change at all. He just stood there by the fireplace, looking at me with what almost seemed like admiration. That's a very serious accusation, Sarah. I hope you have proof. Emma is my proof. Emma already spoke to the investigators, Linda said, her voice rising to near hysteria. She told them nothing happened. Nothing. I looked directly at Emma, who was still hiding behind her hands. Emma, tell them what you told me at Starbucks. Tell them about the special games that started when you were 12. Tell them about the equipment shed at Little League. Tell them why you've been counting down days until college on your bedroom calendar. Emma's shoulders started shaking. Through her fingers, I could hear her crying, not the loud, dramatic sobs of a teenager seeking attention, but the quiet, desperate weeping of someone who'd been drowning for years. Stop it, Rick said sharply. You're traumatizing her all over again. I'm not the one traumatizing her. Rick took a step toward me, and for the first time since I'd known him, the mask slipped slightly. There was something cold and calculating in his eyes that made my skin crawl. You have no idea what you've done. What you've set in motion. Rick, Dad said uncomfortably, maybe we should all take a breath here. No, Jim. Your daughter has accused me of one of the most heinous crimes imaginable. Based on what? The confused ramblings of a teenager who's been going through a difficult time? She's going through a difficult time because you've been raping her, I said, the word cutting through the room like a blade. Mom actually whimpered. Grandpa Morrison stood up so fast his chair rocked backward. That's enough, he boomed. I won't have that kind of language used in this house about my son. Your son, I said, is a predator. The investigators didn't think so, Rick said smoothly, back in control. They interviewed Emma for over 2 hours. If there was any truth to these allegations, don't you think they would have found evidence? Emma finally looked up, her face streaked with tears and mascara. When she spoke, her voice was so quiet everyone had to lean forward to hear her. I was scared, she whispered. Uncle Rick told me what would happen if I talked. He said they'd take me away from Mom and put me somewhere worse. The room went dead silent again. He said if I told them what really happened, I'd destroy everyone I love. Emma's words hung in the air like a confession and an accusation all at once. The silence stretched so long I could hear Mrs. Patterson's dog barking 3 houses down. Then Rick laughed. Actually laughed, a short, bitter sound that made Emma flinch. This is exactly what I was afraid of, he said, shaking his head sadly. Emma, sweetheart, you're confused. The investigators upset you with their questions, and now you're remembering things that never happened. But something had shifted in the room. I could see it in my mother's face, a flicker of doubt creeping in. Dad was studying Rick with an expression I'd never seen before, like he was seeing him for the first time. Emma, Grandma Morrison said gently, honey, are you saying that Uncle Rick, that he actually... She couldn't finish the sentence. Emma nodded, fresh tears streaming down her face. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I didn't want to ruin everything, but I can't. I can't keep pretending anymore. Linda shot up from the couch so fast she knocked over her water glass. No. No, absolutely not. Emma, you're having some kind of breakdown. You need help, professional help, but not because of anything Rick did. Linda, I said carefully, what if you just listen? Listen to what? My daughter destroying the best man I've ever known because she's confused and scared and someone, she wheeled on me, eyes blazing. Someone planted these sick ideas in her head. Rick moved closer to Emma, reaching out like he was going to comfort her, and I saw pure terror flash across her face. Don't touch her, I said sharply. Everyone stared at me. Rick's hand froze mid-reach. Don't touch her. Sarah, Mom whispered, what's gotten into you? Look at her face, Mom. Really look at Emma's face when he gets near her. And they did look. All of them. Emma was pressed so far back into the couch cushions she was practically trying to climb through them, her eyes wide and fixed on Rick's approaching hand like it was a snake about to strike. Rick slowly lowered his arm. She's clearly been traumatized by this whole investigation process. Of course she's jumpy around adults right now. But Grandpa Morrison was frowning. Emma, sweetheart, why don't you come sit by Grandma for a minute? Emma practically launched herself across the room, putting the coffee table and 3 people between herself and Rick. The relief on her face when she reached Grandma's arms was unmistakable. This is ridiculous, Linda said, but her voice had lost some of its conviction. Emma's always been affectionate with Rick. Just last week she was helping him wash his truck in the driveway. Because I have to, Emma said quietly. If I don't act normal, if I don't do what he wants, he gets angry. He reminds me about what would happen to our family if anyone found out. He reminds me that it would be my fault. Dad cleared his throat. Rick, I think maybe you should explain exactly what your relationship with Emma looks like. Day to day, I mean. Rick's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. I don't owe anyone an explanation for being a good father to my adopted daughter. Humorous, Grandpa Morrison said, and there was steel in his voice I'd never heard before. Walk us through a typical day. For the first time since I'd known him, Rick Morrison looked genuinely rattled. This is absurd. You're all going to take the word of a confused teenager over someone you've known for 20 years? We're asking simple questions, Dad said. If there's nothing to hide, then there's nothing to worry about. Rick looked around the room, calculating. I could practically see him weighing his options, trying to figure out how much he could reveal without incriminating himself. The investigators already cleared me, he said finally. Emma couldn't provide any specific details because there aren't any to provide. She's a good kid who's been through trauma, the trauma of being questioned like a criminal about her own family. What kind of details were they looking for? Mom asked quietly. The question hung there like a challenge. Rick opened his mouth to answer, then seemed to think better of it. That's when Emma spoke up, her voice stronger than I'd heard it all evening. They asked about the scar, she said. The room went completely still. Even the grandfather clock seemed to stop ticking. What scar? Grandma Morrison asked, her voice barely audible. Emma's face flushed red, but she didn't look away. The investigators asked if Uncle Rick had any distinguishing marks on his body that I would only know about if he had been inappropriate with me. They said it was a way to prove whether I was telling the truth or not. Rick's face had gone ashen. Emma, don't. The crescent-shaped scar on your left hip, Emma said, her voice gaining strength. From when you fell off your bike onto a fence post when you were 8. You told me the story when I asked about it 3 years ago, after the first time when you made me touch it. The silence was deafening. I watched the color drain completely from Linda's face. Emma, Rick's voice was tight with warning, you're confused about. It's about 2 inches long and curves like a moon, Emma continued, tears streaming down her face but her voice steady. You said your mother wanted to take you to the hospital for stitches, but your father said boys don't cry about every little scrape. So it healed crooked, and you can feel where the metal went deepest because there's still a little indent in the middle. Grandpa Morrison sank into his chair like he'd been shot. Jesus Christ. Emma, stop this right now, Linda's voice cracked. I don't know why you're doing this, but... Because I told the investigators about the scar yesterday, Emma said. I was so scared of what would happen if I told them everything else, but when they asked if there was any way to prove I was telling the truth, I described it. All of it. Exactly. Rick was backing toward the front door, his face a mask of rage barely held in check. This is insane. She could have seen it accidentally, when I was changing clothes, or at the pool. When have you ever been to a pool with us? Dad asked quietly. When have any of us seen you without a shirt on, Rick? The question hung there, damning in its simplicity. In 18 years of family barbecues, beach trips, and summers at the lake, Rick had always been fully dressed. Even on the hottest days, he wore long pants and long sleeves. The investigators are going to verify it, aren't they? I asked Emma. They're going to ask him to show them. Emma nodded. They said they'd be back tomorrow with a warrant for physical evidence if I was willing to testify about what I saw. They said the scar would prove I was telling the truth about everything else. Rick's hand was on the doorknob now. I don't have to listen to this. Linda, we're leaving. But Linda hadn't moved from the couch. She was staring at her daughter with an expression of dawning horror. How do you know about the fence post? She whispered. Rick, you never told me that story. You just said it was from an old accident. It's not important how she knows, Rick snapped. What's important is that you're letting them poison you against me. All of you. The only person I told that story to was Emma, Grandpa Morrison said slowly, his voice hollow. When Rick was 8 years old and came home bleeding. I told him about my own childhood scars to make him feel better. I never mentioned it again, not to anyone except. His eyes widened in realization. Except to Rick himself, years later. He's the only other person who would know those details. Rick yanked the door open. This family deserves what's coming to them. The words came out like a curse before he could stop himself, revealing the rage that had been simmering beneath his controlled facade. Then he was gone, his truck roaring to life in the driveway. We all sat in stunned silence, listening to the sound of gravel spraying as he peeled away from the house. Finally, Linda spoke, her voice so quiet I had to strain to hear her. Emma, baby, is it true? All of it? Emma collapsed into her mother's arms, 18 years of silence finally breaking open like a dam. The next 48 hours passed in a blur of police interviews, legal consultations, and family phone calls that ranged from supportive to absolutely venomous. Rick had disappeared. His truck wasn't at the house on Sycamore Street, and Linda discovered he'd cleaned out their joint savings account, all $47,000, sometime between Sunday night and Monday morning. Detective Martinez, who'd taken over the case from DCFS, issued a BOLO alert for Rick's vehicle and froze his remaining assets. Flight risk, Detective Martinez explained to Linda and me in the sterile conference room at the police station. Classic behavior when perpetrators realize the evidence is mounting against them. Emma had been brave beyond measure during her formal interview on Monday afternoon. With a victim's advocate beside her and Linda holding her hand, she'd recounted 3 years of systematic abuse in excruciating detail. Her testimony was recorded, photographed, and documented with the kind of clinical precision that made my heart break for her. The physical evidence backed up every word. The medical exam confirmed signs of long-term sexual trauma. The search warrant for Rick's electronics had uncovered a hidden folder of photos that made Detective Martinez's jaw clench when she described them to us in vague terms. But by Wednesday morning, I was learning that legal evidence and family acceptance were two entirely different things. My phone had been ringing nonstop since news of Rick's disappearance hit the family network. Aunt Carol, Rick's sister, left a voicemail calling me a vindictive bitch who destroyed a good man's life over teenage dramatics. Cousin Jennifer, the same Jennifer who'd been ostracized for divorcing her abusive husband, sent a text saying she was proud of me for protecting Emma but warned that the Morrison side of the family is circling the wagons. The most painful call came from Grandma Morrison herself. Sarah, honey, her voice trembled through the phone line, I need you to understand something. I've raised 5 children and helped raise 14 grandchildren. I know the difference between a troubled teenager and a truthful one. I held my breath, hoping. Emma is telling the truth. I saw it in her face Sunday night when she described that scar. I saw it in how she looked at Rick. Her voice broke completely. My son is a monster, and I've been blind to it for God knows how long. She was crying now, this 83-year-old woman who buried a husband, raised children through the Depression-era mindset of her own parents, and never let anyone see her weakness. But Sarah, you need to know what's coming. Rick's brothers are hiring him a lawyer. Bobby Morrison from over in Riverside, he's got money from that construction business. They're planning to paint Emma as mentally unstable and you as the mastermind who coached her. My stomach dropped. What do you mean, coached her? They're saying you've always been jealous of Rick's relationship with Emma, that you filled her head with lies because you couldn't stand seeing her happy. They're going to dig into your personal life, honey. Your divorce from Marcus, that time you saw a counselor for depression after the miscarriage. They're going to use everything they can find. The miscarriage. I'd lost a baby at 12 weeks, 3 years ago, and had seen a therapist for 6 months afterward to deal with the grief and the end of my marriage. It was private, painful history that I'd shared with only my closest family members. How do they know about the counseling? Rick knew. Linda told him when you were going through the worst of it, asked him to keep an eye on you at family gatherings. He's been storing up information about all of us for years, apparently. The calculation was breathtaking. Rick hadn't just been abusing Emma, he'd been collecting ammunition against anyone who might eventually threaten him. There's something else, Grandma Morrison continued. They found something when they searched his truck before he disappeared. What kind of something? A notebook. Names, addresses, schedules. Emma wasn't the only child he'd been watching. The trial lasted 3 weeks. Rick had been found in a motel outside Phoenix, Arizona, with a 17-year-old runaway named Kelly whose parents had been searching for her for 8 months. When the FBI arrested him, they discovered he'd been using fake identification documents and had withdrawn another $23,000 from an account Linda never knew existed. I sat in that courtroom every single day, watching Emma transform from a terrified 15-year-old into someone I barely recognized, stronger, clearer, unbreakable. She testified for 6 hours over 2 days, her voice steady as she described years of systematic abuse while Rick's expensive lawyer tried to discredit her. Isn't it true, Miss Morrison, that you've struggled with behavioral problems at school? The lawyer asked during cross-examination. No, sir, Emma replied calmly. My grades dropped junior year because I was having trouble sleeping and concentrating. I now understand that was due to trauma. And isn't it true that your Aunt Sarah coached you on these allegations after your parents' marriage began having problems? Emma looked directly at Rick, who wouldn't meet her eyes. My mother's marriage had problems because her husband was raping her daughter. My Aunt Sarah didn't coach me on anything. She just finally listened when I got brave enough to tell the truth. The prosecutor, Maria Santos, had built an airtight case. The notebook from Rick's truck contained detailed surveillance information on 12 children between the ages of 9 and 16, their school schedules, extracurricular activities, family situations. The runaway girl from Phoenix testified that Rick had approached her with the same grooming tactics he'd used on Emma, promising her a special relationship and a safe place to stay. Most damning of all were the photos on his computer, not just of Emma, but of other children he'd coached, mentored, and helped over the years. The FBI had identified 6 additional victims dating back 15 years. On November 18, 2024, at 2:47 p.m., exactly 8 months after Emma's first text to me, the jury delivered their verdict, guilty on all counts. Rick Morrison was sentenced to 45 years in prison without the possibility of parole. The courtroom erupted. Linda collapsed in tears, not of sadness, but of relief that her daughter would never have to face him again. Grandma Morrison, who'd testified as a character witness for Emma despite the family pressure, reached over and squeezed my hand so hard I thought she might break my fingers. But the most important moment came afterward, in the hallway outside the courtroom. Emma walked up to me with shoulders back and her head held high, no longer the terrified girl who'd sent that midnight text. Aunt Sarah, she said, and for the first time in years, her smile reached her eyes. Thank you for believing me. Thank you for thinking I was worth more than their fake family piece. The Morrison family did fracture, exactly as Rick had predicted. His brothers never spoke to us again. Several cousins chose sides and chose wrong. Thanksgiving dinners became smaller, quieter affairs with only the people brave enough to face the truth. But Emma? Emma bloomed. She started sleeping through the night. Her grades shot back up to honor roll. She joined the debate team and discovered she had a gift for public speaking. She began volunteering with the Children's Advocacy Center, helping other kids find their voices. Sometimes families need to be destroyed. Sometimes the thing everyone's fighting so hard to preserve isn't worth preserving at all. Sometimes the people who call you a traitor for telling the truth are just upset that their comfortable lies have been exposed. Rick Morrison is 63 years old. He'll die in prison. Emma Morrison is 18 now, starting college next month with a full scholarship to study social work. I'd make that phone call again in a heartbeat.